fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers, and we are talking the first week of free agency and a whole bunch of other stuff. Got press conferences to talk about, a little bit of cray-cray going on there, at least by some reports, but we'll get to the bottom of that. And welcome in, Keith. Got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, a lot to talk about today. There's a lot more that's happened in the first couple of days of free agency than we are used to. Seattle is typically not a team that's very active in the first couple of days of free agency, but this year they have been.
Yeah. But they didn't overspend for the most part, except for, I thought, maybe one player, and it's our own player, and we can talk about that. And then the news conference is just kind of crazy because it kind of came after we had, the legal tampering period. So it was yesterday, Wednesday. The first day of official free agency was the news conference where they announced a few, signings, and they talked about the trade with Russell Wilson and the compensation package we got from that. Not only the players, but the draft capital to get back up into the first round this year, along with a additional second round pick that's fairly early at 40, and then first and second next year. So they do have a lot of ability to move around and all that kind of stuff. So I thought the press conference was fascinating. We can start there, and then we can talk about re-signings, who we got, where we're going, what the vision is, all that kind of stuff. Keith, what did you think about the press conference where Pete Carroll opened up with pretty much 15 minutes of kind of scattered thoughts, but at a rewatching of it, I really kind of paid attention to his overarching message, which I thought was, listen, we are who we are and we're damn good at it. And we're going to go at this thing and we're going to go try to win a championship this year. We're not waiting. We can't do that. We're not that team. We're not those guys. We're going to go try to put it together the best we can. And that's the way it's going to be.
See,
that's what I took out of it.
What I took from it is we're delusional if we think we can win this year, but we're going to sell that to people and then go screw it up and win 7 or 8 games and not be in a position to get a quarterback in next year's draft. And they're going to be basically kicking this can down the road year after year after year, and it's going to be.
We ran that algorithm, and it just didn't add up for Pete, and it probably didn't add up for anybody else in the organization either that knows Pete and that's been around. They know how this thing works. This wasn't ever going to be about a rebuild, when the coach is approaching 71 years old this year. It was always going to be about being the most competitive team and doing that as best as they can, at least putting a roster together on September 1st that gives them the best shot. Now, I'm not saying it's going to work or it's going to be the best or whatever. I'm just saying that has always been their philosophy, and that will continue to be their philosophy. And when we arrive at September 1st, and you can say with, fairly certain that they are going to be a 7-win team, I'll accept that from you because I trust your evaluation and your judgment there, and you've been around this thing long enough to know. But I think there's a shot, given the roster and some of the issues and tweaks we've talked about early on when we thought we were going to have Russell Wilson, where we thought that they could kind of tweak 3 or 4 different position groups in order to get back to being a very competitive team. Now that we're tweaking those position groups, now we're a quarterback away. And what I'm saying is that Pete, now this isn't for me, but what I'm saying Pete is going to try to do is he's going to try to get a quarterback in there. And he said it out loud. He basically said, I want to quote this so I don't screw it up. Something about having a point guard. We need a point guard at quarterback, a game manager who protects the football and gets it to the playmakers. We want to win with defense and special teams, and we are going to run the ball to help with that, quote unquote. So he's basically running it back like he ran it back in 2012, where they believe that they're in a position, they're going to be in a position after all of the, the draft, free agency, adding players in the, before camp and so forth, where if they get the right guy, whether it's Drew Lock, and I know we can have that in-depth conversation as time goes on, or it's Baker Mayfield, or if it's Willis in the draft or Ritter or whatever, that they feel that that's their guy that can not turn the ball over a ton and just get it to their guys and kind of be a point guard. I think if they build a strong enough unit on the defensive side, their offense has got some playmakers in place. They're kind of paying attention to the offensive line now. I'm saying there's an opportunity for what he's saying to kind of come to fruition. I don't know if that means 12 wins, but I'm thinking it's not going to be 5 or 6.
So what I'm looking at, though, is this isn't 2012. The roster is not ready for it to be 2012, and there's no quarterback coming in to carry it. This team is 2011, where
that's fair.
Where they brought in, journeyman of T-Jack to come in and be quarterback, and was okay and got them to 7 wins, and they didn't make the playoffs, and that was all they were going to be. And as far as that roster, and then they made the move, got Wilson in, drafted Wagner, got Irvin, brought in Brandon Browner. This isn't 2012. This roster isn't at 2012 ready. It's 2011. It's a bad roster that is improving, but that's it.
Yeah. So what is your opinion on what they do now at the quarterback spot after the press conference, where they didn't fully endorse Locke as being the quarterback in 2022, but they said the things that you would expect them to say to in the quote unquote preseason of 2022, before camps and all that stuff, to prop up Locke and his confidence, to give him the best opportunity to compete, where he's not looking over his shoulder, and yet they may draft a guy. So
I didn't
think about the position group.
I did not get that this was Locke's job. Pete was like, if we can get him back to playing kind of how he did at the end of his
in a 5-game stretch, right?
If we can get him back to that, then sure. But there was no oh yeah, definitely he's our guy, whatever. It was like, maybe. And so he's not sold on Locke, but getting Locke was part of the deal. That apparently, going through the negotiations and stuff, there was an article that you sent me from SI that really kind of detailed how the deal worked out. And it sounded like it was an easy throw in for the Broncos because they were ready to get rid of him. But the Seahawks wanted Locke. He needed to be part of the deal for them. He was never a fixture of the deal because he doesn't have that much value, on either side. But the Seahawks wanted the quarterback, the young guy who still on a rookie deal and all of that, and a chance for him to come in and compete. So basically, it feels like they wanted their bridge quarterback and knew that Locke was good enough to be that, but also know that unless something just absolutely crazy happens, he's not good enough to lead this team beyond that.
So what do they do?
I think they draft a guy. I do think that they, unless the draft just gets away from them as far as the quarterbacks, and a bunch of quarterbacks get drafted way earlier than everyone expects.
Right.
There are 5 quarterbacks in this draft that people talk about. I think that if you put them in last year's draft, the best one is the 6th best quarterback overall. And the worst one is about 15. But there are 5 quarterbacks in this draft, and there's going to be some guys that have a chance to come in and compete for a job. And if you can get one of them in the 2nd round, you go for it. I think you're setting yourself up with a low ceiling player that at best is going to be Kirk Cousins and isn't, a true franchise quarterback. And honestly, I don't like that. I think there are significantly better quarterbacks in the draft a year from now. And I would, we've already been through it. I would make a play at those quarterbacks, not at the ones in this draft. But the Seahawks need one now, and they might as well.
So Pete, and know that he's not going to try to lose. In fact, he's going to do everything he can to win. That's just the way he is, and I'm kind of cool with that. Like, I respect that. I understand that. I've played sports. I know what that means to a team and an organization, and so I'm not going to do anything to badmouth that at all. So, given that, I think drafting a quarterback this year makes sense for them, just in case, because it doesn't. If you have Locke and if you have Geno Smith, and you draft a guy and they have 3 quarterbacks on the roster in 2022, I'm fine with that, and it gives whoever we draft an opportunity, even if it's Willis, it could be Ritter. I've looked at Willis and Ritter. Here's my thinking after what Pete said about the point guard situation at quarterback. I think it's going to be Desmond Ritter. I think out of the quarterbacks that are in this draft, he's the guy that fits that description the best and gives them a little bit of athletic upside.
Man, I'd hate that.
Honestly. I know, but I think that's what we're going to do. And I think I would be okay with it, because I think if you can get Desmond Ritter at 40 or 41, and draft your, stellar left tackle or defensive lineman or edge rusher at 9, or you drop back and, you get to 15 or whatever, and you get an additional pick. I think if you can get an additional pick and you pick at 15, you still get your guy, Jermaine Johnson or Jordan or Trevor Penning, and you get an extra pick around the 50 range, that gives you even more options to take one of those 2nd rounders and get a guy like Ritter on the roster. You have an asset at that point. You have a quarterback you can develop. I'm not saying that he's going to be any better than Cousins. What I am saying, though, based on the philosophy that we just heard, is that while Pete's been riding Wilson for 10 years now and his playing style, Russell, he made it very clear in that press conference that Pete Carroll has a philosophy, and they adapt that philosophy around the players that they have, but the philosophy doesn't change. And Pete's philosophy is defense, special teams, point guard, quarterback. And I think you saw that a little bit with like a Jared Goff type situation in Los Angeles, where that's kind of what they had. And they were able to turn that into a successful roster around him in order to get to the highest level. And I think maybe that's the plan going forward, is they don't want to invest so much in the quarterback. They want to build the entire team. And that's going to be important. And it seemed to me like, in a roundabout way, Pete was saying he lost his way for a while.
Yeah. And I look at the rest of the NFL, and I look at what wins and what doesn't. And Pete Carroll, quote unquote, losing his way was why they kept winning, because they had a quarterback and they built around their quarterback. Now, they didn't build around their quarterback well, because they didn't give him an offensive line, but they at least gave him some weapons, and they did kind of build around the quarterback, but they never embraced Wilson as a guy that could drop back and throw it 35 times a game.
So I want to say something.
They did
really
for like
quick.
4 games, and then he threw a couple interceptions in one, and they bailed on the entire plan.
You could make an argument that during the run up to the Super Bowl and the first Super Bowl, that Russell Wilson wasn't yet the quarterback that you're talking about, where we lost our way. I think that you could make the argument that roster building process up till that point, and maybe even to 2014, was the way that Pete's talking about right now.
True. And he had a historically great defense with multiple first ballot Hall of Fame players on it. And the expectation that he's going to hit on another Richard Sherman in round 5, or a Cam Chancellor in round 6, and that kind of stuff, that's how you're going to build your team, and you're going to do it again, I think is absurd. It happened once. It's a very delicate balance. This whole idea about having this defense and then having this premier quarterback, because they don't grow on trees. We know that, and we just traded ours away. So just traded away the best quarterback in franchise history by a wide margin. But we found out that this situation was bound to happen. True. John Schneider said that they were and I get this because of Mark Rodgers. I'm not going to throw Mark Rodgers under the bus or what. I don't know him. I don't know exact details or whatever, but this smells like it's Wilson's agent, for those of you that don't know who Mark Rodgers is. Wilson's agent, I think, kind of forced this issue to the point where the relationship was damaged, and they realized they were not going to be able to extend another contract after this current one. And so they looked at the situation and came to terms with the idea that this was going to be the best value upside that they could get for Russell Wilson right now. Yeah. So the thing that got me about this negotiation was that I kind of missed before, was that because of Seattle showing a lot of interest in Josh Allen in 2018, and that was the start of it, and that it made the 2019 negotiation with Russell Wilson very tenuous and much more difficult than I think any of us knew. And it was not something that either side felt good about because of the process. And it was because the Seahawks really liked Josh Allen. And, there was a joke out there about, trading with Cleveland for the number 1 overall pick and all of that. And that was never actually an offer or anything, but there was interest from Seattle to go get a guy like Josh Allen. And look what Josh Allen has developed into. Like, there's a reason why Seattle would have interest, even with Russell Wilson on the roster, because you're talking about getting a great player on a rookie contract rather than $30 million player. And I'll hand it to John Schneider. He seems to be kind of identifying pretty decent quarterback prospects. I'm going to talk about that in a second, because Josh Allen, when you looked at his career, what is it, Wyoming? Yep. It wasn't completely stellar, and it was Wyoming. So, it's like, that's the thing is, so he had nothing around him, and you go and watch him and his talent, it was like, it was like a men playing among boys. And it was obvious that he was good. And so, but his stats never looked great. So what you said is correct. At the end of that sort of negotiation happened the following spring, Mark Rodgers ended up getting a concession that ended up being pretty big in this whole thing, which was a no trade clause. And so this whole thing was just kind of contentious. And then I think the Seahawks could see the writing on the wall, this whole Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers type numbers that Russell Wilson was going to command and demand. And they just felt like they couldn't go forward anymore. There was just too much. Yeah. I think Russell Wilson now seems somewhat disingenuous. And I like the player. I'm not going to badmouth him, but it seems slightly disingenuous when he says, he wants to be back in Seattle. He wants to win Super Bowls here, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, he's researching 14 teams he wants to go to. And I think that put pressure on John and Pete to act now. And they did what they could do, and they got the value that they could get. And here we are. One of the things that I did find out that I didn't actually know was that there is a path for Wilson to void his contract after the 2022 season. and get out of his contract a year early. And certain conditions have to be met and whatever. But there was the path that the Seahawks were going to lose a year of team control, that they were going to have to franchise him or negotiate a $50 million a year contract and all of that. And I think you're right. I think it was basically, they looked at it. They knew Wilson because of, different things. Wilson didn't want to be with the Seahawks. And they were like, what can we get? What can we get for value? And they went to Wilson. Wilson said his first choice was Denver, and they went and negotiated with Denver, and they got what the best deal that they could. Could they have gotten more? Probably. I think they could have from another team, but Wilson would have had to have waived his no trade clause, and he wanted to go to Denver, and they got pretty good value considering. If it wasn't for that no trade clause, they would have. I think they could have gotten significantly more, but the no trade clause.
And I think I think the reason that most people kind of see this as a fair trade, I'm not saying it was extremely lopsided one way or the other, was because they were desperate to get a quarterback too. So Seattle knew that, and so it kind of went that way as well. Okay, so let's move on from the Russell Wilson thing. Is there anything else in the press conference that kind of stood out to you? I mean, I got a lot of, notes about culture and second chances and redemption. And he listed a whole bunch of players that kind of went into that. And then the quarterback talk, just, and then kind of the philosophy of just, drafting and all that kind of stuff. They went into a little bit of that.
Honestly, they did all of that, and none of that I found as compelling, because there was nothing in there that they haven't said 100 times. It was really just the quarterback stuff and not just quarterback, but Russell Wilson. That was the actual stuff that was substantial.
Yeah. And they did both apologize for the way that Bobby Wagner found out about his release. And so at least they own that. So let's talk about free agency. Let's get into now the 2022 season. We've officially entered the new season, and it's the off season for us, but it's one of the most exciting times for us because there's so many moving parts right now in strategy and cap space and how to manage that, and contracts and filling out a roster so you're competitive. How do you think they've done so far, and is there anything that stands out that you disagree with?
Well, actually, I think the team's done pretty well. There's a couple of players that have left that on head scratching deals. DJ Reid is a guy I love. He's only 25, but 3 years, $33 million puts him, that's incredible money for a guy who's got a year and a half of production, of which he's had multiple injuries. I mean, the tape's good. I'm not gonna say anything, but that's a lot of money. The Jets happen to be the Jets, and they have a lot of money. Jamarco Jones going to Tennessee. The first one.
And let me interrupt you for a second. I believe that the Seahawks offered like 7. Yeah. And DJ Reid came back and said that was disrespectful.
Wow.
I know. And we talked the week before when we did our primer show about DJ Reid, and we talked about the market being like between 7 and 10, and we'd be comfortable around the 7 or 8 range, but not 10 or more. And that's what he got. And Seattle was never, I think, going to go that high on him. They weren't going to go that high on Griffin. They weren't going to go that high on Reid.
Yeah. And if you weren't going to go that high on Griffin, why would you go that high on Reid? Griffin was the better player.
Agreed.
And so, you look at Jamarco Jones going to Tennessee. I originally thought, I read that it was $4.8 million per year. It's not. It's $2.4 million per year over 2 years. And that's actually not a bad deal. When I saw the original thing, I thought it was $4.8 million per year. And I'm like, do they realize he's not a good player? But at 25, $2.4 million, they just got themselves a swing tackle that can play both sides. Maybe not play both sides great, but he can be that 6th offensive lineman that can play 4 positions for you. And there's value in that. So, but the Seahawks aren't losing him. And so with those, okay. The idea that they were able to get Artie Burns, who's only 26, for on a 1 year, $2 million deal seems like a steal. And given
a lot of
that
upside there,
a lot of upside, and so given that DJ Reid is gone, getting a guy that can come in and start for what feels like pennies.
And he played for Sean Desai last year in Chicago,
yes,
so he knows the defense. He knows what he's supposed to do. Now they get a veteran guy in that can help the coaching staff there. So that's good.
Yep. So I liked that move. And like I said, and that felt like, God, it felt like a really good steal. Bringing in a linebacker, Nuaso from the Chargers, again, another 25-year-old, $10 million a year for a linebacker. And you're like, so they cut Bobby Wagner at $20 million to sign a guy at 10. I mean, granted, they don't play the same position at linebacker, but
he's going to be that 3-4 outside Sam and rush the passer. And I think it's a good deal. I mean, with the upside, the athleticism, he's also great in coverage. Prior safety experience at USC before he switched positions. And so he's a good cover guy as well in that spot. I think it's an upgrade from like who else would have been there? Kerry Hyder. I mean, they're similar or
no, it would have been Benson Mayowa is kind of who
they just released, by the way.
Which absolutely had no business being on the roster still. And so that was a great, I mean, he's a great addition to have that, especially as they transition to more of a 3-4 and less of a 4-3. I mean, there's still going to be hybrid and be multiple, but it'll be definitely more 3-4 looking. Having that strong side.
Yeah, I think he's even better than Benson Mayowa, because Benson Mayowa played out of position last year.
That's not what I'm saying. Is he's replacing Benson Mayowa. He's a massive upgrade over Benson Mayowa. So I'm not even considering that. So you look at that's a good move, and then you think about Shelby Harris that they got in the trade is a nice upgrade on defense.
We haven't really talked about the trade guys before, but Shelby Harris is a good piece.
Artie Burns coming in at corner. They re-signed someone that we haven't talked about. They re-signed Diggs, Quandary Digs, to actually a fairly large contract, much larger than I was expecting. And that was kind of the signal that they weren't in rebuild mode, that they were still trying to win. Because that was at like $11 million a year for a free safety. They were committing to making sure that defense did not take a step back. That defense is going to take a massive step forward. And you don't do that by, dropping your free safety that was a Pro Bowler. So it was a bigger contract than I was expecting, mainly because I just thought they were going into more of a rebuild and try and get younger mode, but they wanted to keep their good players, and they did. And
a guy that's a great locker room guy and a good guy on the team as far as kind of being a team captain level player for them. The other guy that they really liked too, then they brought back, was Al Woods. Cap hit in 2022 is $3.46 million. That's a good contract for Al Woods. He came in on a 2-year deal. Will Disley was kind of the shocker for me. Not that he came back, but it was a big deal. Now, when you break down the contract, it's not quite as bad as it looked like. It's 3 years, $24 million. But when you break it down, the cap hit in 2022 is $4.59 million. It goes up though to 8 something next year. And then the final year of that deal is non-guaranteed. So it's not.
And you got to look that this year the cap jumped like 28 million. Next year it's going to jump 40 million beyond that, and the year after that it's going to jump at least 30 because the new TV deals kick into the cap, as does some of the money the league is making through the betting markets and stuff. Those also get kicked into the cap formula.
Like a team like Jacksonville just went crazy
because they can
in free agency, right? They just had money to burn and they burned it.
No one was going to Jacksonville unless they overpaid.
Oh, it was crazy.
As awful as that Christian Kirk contract was, there was no other way for them to go to get and sign a big upgrade unless they overpaid.
4 years, $72 million for Christian Kirk. Now we're talking a decent receiver a number 2 receiver on most teams, number 3 receiver on some, and that contract. My goodness, Keith.
Would you rather have him or Tyler Lockett as your number 2?
Well, sure.
Right. I'd rather have Tyler Lockett.
Yeah.
And that'll give you an idea of just how massive that contract is. Yeah. But if you're Jacksonville and you're terrible and you're terrible every year,
right?
You have so much money to spend. You might as well spend it.
Yeah.
And if you don't overspend, no one's going to come. So they overspend on some guys this year. They improve. They put some weapons around their quarterback, and they become more of a destination in terms of like people aren't actively avoiding them anymore. And then, 2 years from now, you end up having to cut Christian Kirk because he's making too much for his production. But in the meantime, you've been able to upgrade the rest.
Yeah, that's the thing about moves like this in teams like Jacksonville is they'll do this 1 year and then they'll be in cap hell for a couple of years. Their roster will deteriorate and they'll be back in the same spot.
Yeah,
as opposed to teams that do it, consistently over time.
If they do it right, and draft reasonably well, then they can can basically repair some of this, and then they'll be able to let a guy like Christian Kirk go because they've drafted well behind him, and so they can get out from underneath this. If they don't draft well, though, then they're always going to be bad. They're just always going to be bad. And
we've seen that that's probably likely with them. Okay. A couple other players, Austin Blyth. We talked briefly about the center market last week and mentioned his name in passing kind of as possibly a good fit because of his time with the Rams, 3-year starter there. And he moved on to Kansas City last year. I thought he would have been a guy that we would have brought in last year just because of the Shane Waldron move and Dixon, sorry, the coach. And so they brought him in this year on a value deal. I think it's a $4 million 1 year deal.
Yeah. He didn't play much this last year.
He didn't play at all. He had a couple dozen snaps all year.
He had I think he had 26 snaps total. And so that's the concerning thing there is how much money they gave him for a guy that didn't play in 2021. But
how likely does that mean that we've moved on from Posick?
I think it's highly likely that we've moved on from Posick. I still think they still need a younger player. They need some insurance because Blyth didn't play in 2021.
What about that Shepley kid that we kind of picked up last year?
They brought him back. They signed him to his exclusive rights deal. They did bring him back. He's going to be on the roster. So they liked him enough to pick him up off waivers a year ago when San Francisco tried to squeeze him through and get him onto the practice squad. And they liked him enough to re-sign him. So I don't know why they never played him last year. I would have, but he's still around, and so
I agree though I agree that we may see that position group addressed in the draft. Who else? Well, Noah Fant. I mean, we can count some of these trade guys as guys. Noah Fant coming back on. I really like the roster the way it's kind of building out. We talked early in this show about roster building and philosophy, and I don't necessarily see them being a 7-win team this year with this roster if they can get some sort of competence at the quarterback spot. Now, that's the big question.
I don't see competence.
I know you don't, but it's hard to see right now this time of the year, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest. They haven't solved that problem yet. And I think that they're talking the talk with Drew Lock. Well,
where's the path?
There's a couple of deals that you can
because
do.
none of
the deals.
There's no good option.
Here's the realistic options. Matt Ryan's going to be available here in a couple minutes because Watson's signing with Atlanta. You got Garoppolo and you got Baker Mayfield. Now I know, but those are they're the same player. Out of those two, who would you rather have? I think I would rather have Garoppolo because he's He's good. And
but you won't get him because San Francisco's not going to give a division rival their quarterback.
I know. So
didn't Sidney Jones re-sign with Seattle?
Sidney Jones came back on a 2-year deal, $4 million. They're even less than $4 million, I think.
Yeah,
so
that was a good signing. Deal. So yeah. I think you've got your 2 starting corners in Artie Burns and Sidney Jones, and so they need to fill out.
Well, and the kid, repairing his patella tendon.
Yeah,
Brown.
Trey Brown. I'm not counting on him simply because of
the nature of the injury.
It's such a bad injury. I'm not like saying, oh well, he's not a good player, because he is. But it's a matter of in this year. I don't know if we can count on him a year from now. Sure. But this year, I don't know what we're going to get out of him. Couple of interesting things. Guys like, just looking at some of the roster, some exclusive rights free agents, which means the team could have them back for less than $500,000 if they wanted them. Guys like John Ursua, Gavin Hellsop, Marcus Webb, and the team didn't even tender them offers.
Right.
I found that to be really odd.
I mean, those are it's easy to replace guys like that, though. And it could point to a scheme change as well. They did tender Brian Monet, Penny Hart, and cornerback John Reid.
Yep. There's one other move that I think we need to talk about, and that is that they used the original round tender on Phil Haynes, which means if he signs elsewhere, which I think he actually signed his tender, so he's not eligible to sign
and that
elsewhere.
Tender is at $2.5 million, so it's not cheap. It's not a cheap deal.
No, I was really surprised because this is a guy that has barely played in 3 years.
And he was cut in September and brought back onto the practice squad for a while. I mean, a fringe guy, but they must have seen something there when he came in for a couple of games that they liked.
When they drafted him, he looked like a future starter because even though he was a 5th round pick, this guy was a absolute road grader in college. Just perfect Seahawks run or guard in his ability to just drive people and then suck at pass blocking. And he's just battled injuries and has not been able to stay healthy. But I think they see the talent there. And he did play a couple of games this last year, played pretty dang well in those couple of games. So maybe they're looking at him. I know at one point a couple of years ago, they had him working out at center, during training camp, although he never played in a game there. I don't know. It seems to be a lot for a guy that has barely played in 3 years in the league.
So I have one more name, and then we can get out of here. It's been reported that the Seahawks have Trent Brown, the offensive tackle, huge guy, previously with San Francisco, in town right now, taking a physical. And signs point to them signing him, which is crazy to me. I think they're going to have to spend a lot of money to do it too. And I want to talk to you about it. Guy is 6'7", 380 pounds. There's a 6'7", 380 pound guy in the draft this year that we were going to avoid like the plague.
Yeah, but the 6'7", 380 pound guy in the draft got dominated at the Senior Bowl practices.
Right. Trent Brown has serious upside. Yeah.
Trent Brown's a Pro Bowler. He's a perennial Pro Bowler. He's getting a little long in the tooth, but honestly,
what does this say about scheme though for Seattle when they're bringing a guy in that size?
I think it's signaling that they want to be good on the offensive line, and they haven't been forever.
Do you see them? He's had experience at left tackle and right tackle. Do you see him more as a right tackle?
I see him more as a left tackle.
Wow. Really?
And
so this could be the left tackle situation.
I think the team is not going into this season with a rookie or Stone Forsythe as the only option at left tackle.
They may figure that they would have had to have paid Dwayne Brown $10 million minimum to come back for 1 year, maybe even 12. And they might as well pay Trent Brown, 14 or so to come in for and be here for like a 3-year deal maybe.
And be better. Yeah. Especially when you look at the division and you see Whitworth retiring in LA, and now you have San Francisco losing their guy, and all of a sudden you're like, this division, which was by far the best in football last year, suddenly is coming back down to earth because the Rams are they're hemorrhaging talent at the moment, and although they did sign Allen Robinson at wide receiver, but
they did. But
all that does is replace Odell Beckham Jr. So
sure.
you look at what's going on there, and that's the division is kind of coming back down to earth, especially if the 49ers and Trey Lance and all of that, they wasted a year of his development last year, and so now they've got to deal with the growing pains there. This division is not as good as it was a year ago.
So I'll come back to Trent Brown just for half a second. My only concern with him is injury, Keith.
Yeah.
Like he's played 2 out of his 5 seasons so far. He's played 2 full 16-game seasons, and the rest have been less than half of that.
Mm-hmm.
So he's either healthy or he's playing, 8 games. The good news about that, if you don't overpay him, is that we do have a guy like Stone Forsythe on the roster that could get some playing time in a year where you're transitioning to figure out what we've got in him. That would be the upside.
Well, and I know Brown played all year last year, but that was also the first time in a very long time that Brown has played all year. You look at his career and how often he was injured and all of that, and he's now 37. So yes, Trent Brown is a guy who is injury, prone, but he's significantly younger, and at this point in his career, better. And you're essentially, as far as reliability, it's kind of the same guy.
Interesting. Wow. All right. Lots of stuff. By the time we put this out, this show out, I'm sure that there'll be more stuff. We'll have to play catch up next week. Next week, I think we're going to do a post free agency, post combine, post Russell Wilson trade. We have new picks to play with. Mock draft 3.0. So that'll be fun. And, we'll probably, I don't know, maybe we'll go back to our original format, Keith, where each of us brings in a draft and we talk about all the options. That seems to be fun too. Or we can pair up again and kind of make picks as we do it live on the show.
I just think you want me to have to come in shirtless with one of those belts and be John Snyder. I think that's what you're trying to make happen. And
as long as it's not in person when we do that, Keith, I'm okay with that. You just stay over there. I'll stay over here. All right, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. Please subscribe and share it. Thanks, and go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.